Welcome everyone to Big Tent USA. So good to see people chiming in from all around the country. We're very grateful to have you all here with us tonight. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I am the president of Big Tent USA. While the world is very chaotic, Big Tent USA remains committed to defending our democratic values, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Our goal is to empower you with facts, guidance, and calls to action so that you can become a stronger, more effective advocate. And we hope you'll take lessons learned from Leigh and Amanda tonight to continue to fight back. We're so excited about tonight's conversation. Amanda Carpenter is the writer and editor at Protect Democracy. Before joining Protect Democracy, she was the writer for the Bulwark and a CNN contributor. Prior to that, she worked on Capitol Hill as Senator Ted Cruz's communications director and South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint's speechwriter. So Amanda has a lot to tell us. Leigh McGowan is the New York Times bestselling author of A Return to Common Sense: How to Fix America Before We Really Blow It. I really hope we haven't really blown it yet, but that's why we're here, to make sure that we're not past that point. She is the host and creator of the viral award-winning digital brand PoliticsGirl, which has become a trusted source of information in the age of polarized media. Known for her kitchen rants, breaking down key issues of the day into digestible pieces, Leigh has amassed hundreds of millions of views, won 2 Webbies, and launched the highly successful PoliticsGirl podcast. One of the reasons, Amanda and Leigh, we wanted to have you two together is that we think in the before times we might not have had this conversation. You're from very different political perspectives, but here we are all together under the tent as allies. So I'm going to turn the call over to you, and I'd like you to sort of tell us how you're feeling about where we are, what you see the state of play is currently for the United States of America, and we'll try to get to as many questions in the chat after Amanda and Leigh have a conversation. So Amanda, I'm going to let you start first. Thank you so much again for coming to Big Tent.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, for organizing this, for everyone for attending, and also providing the opportunity for me to talk with Leigh, who I've been a big fan for a long time from afar. So this is just a super cool event for me personally. As to, as we kick this off and try to assess where we are right now, I mean, that's a hard question, right? Like, there's a lot of people who have asked me this question, and it's almost like they want to know, like, give me a scale, give me a number, show me on this continuum where we are at and how much worse it can get. And I'm sort of reluctant to do that because we are in a state of authoritarianism, right? It can get worse. It can get much worse. There's no bottom, right, to how this goes. And so one way that I've approached this question through my role at Protect Democracy starts with the framework of where we were assessing where this Trump administration would go last year. We produced this document called the Authoritarian Playbook that laid out the biggest threats to democracy essentially posed by Trump 2.0. And those subject areas get into his willingness to issue mass pardons for January 6 rioters and beyond, the weaponization of the Department of Justice, the regulatory retaliation that we see, the potential for federal law enforcement overreach, deployment of the U.S. military on American soil, and finally, the threat of that autocrat will never leave office, right? Those are the big things systematically that we've been focused on as an organization. And so last week, I wrote sort of a status report of sorts, ticking through how much progress Trump has made on those major buckets. And, you know, in some, like the mass pardons, which I think are a systematic threat because it's essentially a way to license law-breaking, license political violence, and place himself and his supporters above the law. He's made a lot of headway on, right? He's done that unmitigated. Other things, maybe not so much. Other things just need more time to materialize. And so we can get into all those things a little bit more. But I guess, Leigh, like, what's your vibe check in these dark, weird, chaotic times?
Yeah, listen, my vibe check. I mean, this is a nightmare, right? We're living through a nightmare. This is an authoritarian nightmare. And you're right. We can't call it anything different. This isn't like rising authoritarianism or possible authoritarianism. It is. And the question is, how much worse is it going to get? I think the thing is that you and I were probably both hoping we could avoid this with the last election, that we wouldn't go this way, right? Like you and I might sit on different sides of what would have been a traditional political spectrum, but I think we both know that the essentialness of America is based in our democracy and our rule of law and the fact that the law applies to all of us. And as you were talking about, that's not where we sit now. And so that's why anything is possible. And that's why when you ask someone like, how are you doing? People go, fine, accounting for where we're at, right? Like nothing is
Yeah.
fine. This is a nightmare, right? Like, and I think most people need to know that they are not alone in feeling that. There's no point in pretending that things are normal. And I think that's how people are feeling right now. They're like, am I really supposed to just go to work while they cut the Department of Education in half? Like, am I really just supposed to go to work while I stress that my parents are going to lose their Social Security and move in with me tomorrow? Like there's a lot to worry about. And I want people to understand that they're not alone in feeling that. And it's why so many of us are trying to figure out the best ways to fight back.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I've kind of come to the same conclusion where even people in my work life, you first ask, like, how are you doing personally? Because we know everything externally is in the crapper, right? I mean, it can get worse. We're trying to gut our way through it, trying to find a way to pace ourselves through the next 4 years, knowing, what could come, what we can do now. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. And finding community is absolutely the most important thing in this time. You need to activate. You being here right now, attending a Zoom. Yeah, I got to tell you, big props to the organizers of this, because I absolutely love it. Kicked off with an ask of something to do. I've been through previous iterations of my life, many events, get together, networking, brainstormings, convenings, where you talk and talk and talk about doing things, but nobody has a takeaway of what to do. Love, the first thing was do the call tree, call your representatives, get activated. Keep finding the groups that ask you to do things, because that's going to be required. So I'm going to have an ask for you guys right now. Subscribe to our newsletter at Protect Democracy if you can keep it. This is not because it's a vanity project for me. It's our communication tool. Like, it is our communication tool to communicate our ideas and talk about the issues we think are most important. It is not just me writing it. We have a staff of over 130 people, and they are like way smarter than me. We have experts from the Department of Homeland Security. We have all kinds of litigators. We have disinformation experts. We have AI experts. So on any given day, we will have somebody jumping to write something really smart on free speech, on protests, on domestic deployment of the military. And so me and some of my colleagues, it's just really just playing cruise director at times. So please subscribe to that, like it, share it. It's not a vanity project. As we see the continued clampdown on free speech, corporate media cave, to the authoritarian impulse, we're seeing way more anticipatory obedience than I knew it was coming. I did not think it was going to happen that fast. Did not anticipate that Jeff Bezos would be sitting alongside Donald Trump at inauguration and essentially selling out his paper to the new regime, right? Like the collapse, we saw reporters fleeing from there, good reporters that have done really good work over the last 10 years covering Donald Trump. Like, that's another thing to remember. Like, when you think you are tired of this, it is for good reason. I came to Washington in 2005. Donald Trump came on the scene in 2015. It's been the last 10 years of my life, and probably yours. So, eat a protein bar, do whatever you do, find your people, and we're going to keep going through this.
Yeah. I think the thing that people have to understand is that this is a very traumatic time for everyone that's living in America, but only because we've never been through it before. I often say that America is this really young nation in the scheme of the world, right? Like, we're almost 250 years old, but in the scheme of world history, we're a very young nation and we're acting out. And this is actually pretty typical for a nation to go through some sort of like authoritarian, curious moment. And we have allowed ourselves to get here. Now, I would blame the current Republican Party for allowing it to get this far. I think we could have taken Donald Trump out of the running back during his second impeachment. They could have just removed him and made it so he couldn't run again, because clearly he's not someone that should be running. But you're talking about these, billionaires that were sitting behind Donald Trump at the inauguration. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind, that what these people are trying to plan for us is not a republic. It's not a democratic republic. It's not what the people want. It's why they're spending so much time gerrymandering states and suppressing votes. They don't really care what we think. They care what those people that were sitting behind Donald Trump think. And honestly, Jeff Bezos doesn't care about the Washington Post. He doesn't care about his paper. He cares about the spaceships he wants to build and making sure he gets government contracts for them. He cares that Amazon keeps doing well. He cares that if we take over the post office, he gets a shot at taking it over. That's what Jeff Bezos is thinking of. They're all trying to think of, how do I get in the good graces of this man who will give me nothing unless I am in his good graces. That is how Trump works. In many ways, his transactional nature allows us to understand him a lot better. We could have a smarter autocrat wannabe, and we would be in more trouble. In some ways, we can understand what Trump's moves are going to be. The Tesla ad they just did on the White House lawn recently, this is ridiculous. But it's because his favorite billionaire is unhappy because his stock is tanking. And I want people to understand that's because we're doing something. When it comes back to it, it feels like we're helpless. It feels like we have nothing to do, but we are already doing something. The reason Tesla's stock is tanking is because we are making choices out here in the world. They want us to feel helpless. They want us to feel hopeless. They want us to feel like we can't do anything and they have all the power, but that is not the case. If it was the case, they wouldn't spend so much time suppressing our votes, trying to change laws. Eli's got his pink fingers in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race because he wants to control that swing state election. He's got his fingers in a Senate bill in Dakotas because he wants to change a ruling for himself in those courts. There is something these billionaires are doing, and we can stop them in many, many ways. So it's great that people are paying attention to things like a Wisconsin Supreme Court race on April 1st, or this SB 21 bill in Dakotas, or in Delaware, because this is what we can do. These are the action items we can take. And it's not just staying engaged and involved, listening to your newsletter, reading your newsletter, watching something like my podcast, which I try to do once a week, to not give you the news. I always say I don't give people the news. I explain the news because it's too much. It's too much for people. I do it in my rants in my kitchen to try and break it down easily. And I do it once a week in the podcast to try and say, here's what I think you should be thinking about. Here are people who are either taking action or are directing you to take action, or things that you can do to understand better. So if you find yourself at a cocktail party or you find yourself at a restaurant and somebody says something, you know what the truth is and you can speak to that. And that is very, very important that we speak up, whether that's in our communities or if it's in somewhere where we don't know the people as well. My hairdresser used to just be MAGA straight across the board. And every time I would get in there, she'd say something just that I thought was
Isn't
asinine.
that uncomfortable?
Yes.
What'd you do? Did you change hairdressers? You just suck it up? What'd you do?
Over time, I talked her through things. So I would say, I always say to people, if you're talking to someone that has a different political perspective than you, don't start with arguments, start with curiosity, right? Be like, oh, why do you think that? And she'd say, well, I read it here. And you're like, do you know that? Do? Or have you looked into da-da-da? And it is so much more helpful to move conversations along with curiosity rather than anger, even if you think that they're being absolutely ridiculous. And over time, you're able to change people's minds. And often it's the one-on-one conversations we have at our own dining room tables or at our own grocery stores or at our own yoga classes, those kind of places where an idea gets into somebody's head and over time you can start to change how people feel. Look at how people feel about Elon Musk right now. People hate him. My son did a project on him in the second grade about what a hero he was for the environment. And now he's a pariah, right? Because he's really trying to change the world stage. If Trump wants to be king of America, Elon wants to be king of the world. And both things we have to say no to.
Yeah. One of the things, I started thinking about, you mentioned, your job, or maybe not your job, but your approach to doing the videos is to explain the news, not do the news. And I think that's really important. Like the biggest challenge that we have as consumers is trying to figure out what is most important to focus on and what isn't. And that's where the explanation comes in, right? Like there's so much flying around. They're flooding the zone with SIT. We all know that strategy. So how do you decide what matters? And one of the things that I think is helpful is to ask a few questions. Like number one, is this something that's abstract and vague? Because Trump throws out a lot of abstract, vague threats. Or is this something more detailed that actually has a plan accompanied with it, whether that's a piece of legislation, whether that's allies messaging it constantly, whether there's a candidate that's doing that in a certain state. Like that's sort of how we go through the framework of like, okay, are we going to take this threat to buy Greenland or make Canada 51st state seriously at this moment? It may materialize later, but like, okay, yes, that's important. It's horrible to do to our allies, but we as practitioners in doing this kind of work have to pick the most urgent things that have the longest chance term of success in protecting eventually our ability to compete in future elections. Like,
I think it's hard for people to decide sometimes what the most important things are. So often I say to people, like obviously it's this flooding the zone thing is a tactic. It's meant to exhaust us. It is meant to make us feel like we can't possibly keep track of all of it. It's too much. You feel overwhelmed. And that's a goal. That is what they are trying to do. It is a way to beat people down and make people check out. And I would say one of the best things you can do, and it goes back to being in community, is pick 2 or 3 things that you really care about, whether that's healthcare, LGBTQ rights, whether it's the environment, those kind of things. Pick the thing you really care about, because you cannot possibly worry about every single issue, right? So for me, I'm very passionate about healthcare because I have a very serious, very rare disease. I am very passionate about Social Security because my in-laws are dependent on it. I'm very, serious about veterans' rights because my father-in-law is a Navy hero. So these are things that I really care about and I want to pay attention to. But with your friends, have them choose other topics that they are passionate about, and then keep each other informed, because you cannot possibly do it all yourself, nor should you have to. And I think the thing is that so many people in America don't understand how our government works. And that's by no fault of their own. In many ways, we took civics out of school. There's a reason Donald Trump said, I love the uneducated, because the less we know, the more we know how to change it. There's a lot of people watching Donald Trump do all of these EOs and thinking, yes, well, the president's just allowed to do that. And I want to say, no, that is not at all how our laws are made, right? Like, our laws are made through Congress. The president is allowed to sign it once it is passed all the way through Congress and it gets to his desk and he signs it. But an EO is a short-term thing and it can be stopped by Congress. It's only not being stopped by Congress right now because he owns both sides, but that's not how we make laws, which is how each EO is ending up in court right now, which is why the judicial branch has usurped the legislative branch for being the most important thorn in Trump's side right now, because they're the ones saying, you're not allowed, you're not allowed, you're not allowed. He's like, everyone's fired. They're like, everyone's rehired. Everyone's this. You're like, no, they are not. That is how he is ruling. But most people don't understand how our government works. So they don't know that what he's doing is wrong. So he gets away with a lot of it. And I want to tell people, like, don't feel bad if you don't understand how our government works, right? That's by design. What were we told our entire lives not to talk about? Politics and religion, right? And what are the 2 things that have caused the most problems in the history of the world? Politics and religion, because we cannot talk about it. We don't know how to talk about it. We have no dialogue out there in the universe that doesn't feel hostile. And so we have been taught to not talk about this, and then it sort of got away from us, right? I often say to people, not paying attention to politics doesn't mean politics doesn't affect you. It means you can't affect it, right? It's one of the reasons I wrote my book, A Return to Common Sense, because I wanted to write a political book for non-political people, because most people are not political people. They want to live their life and make sure their kids go to good schools and they're doing well and everyone's healthy. They don't want to be watching what each senator is doing from day to day. And we have to now, because we're losing our country and it's exhausting for people. So I want to say, pick 2 or 3 issues that you really care about, follow those issues so you become an expert in those things, inform your friends and your family what they need to care about because you did the research on those issues, and then you will have a much better and more cross-section knowledge of what's going on without feeling like you are being drowned by the amount of things that are happening around us.
Yeah, I think that is really, really wise and tested advice. In terms of thinking about what issue to focus on, I think my most important, and it's one that sounds like sort of easy, but just work with me through it, is protecting electoral competition. If you study what modern authoritarians do,
explain that electoral competition. Break that down a little for me.
Electoral competition, the ability to run in elections and stand a chance of winning, right? Like being able to campaign and win, to defeat an incumbent. Because if you look at what modern authoritarians do, not the ones that have traditionally come to power by force, but people like Orban, Putin, they win democratically run elections, but then they use their power in a way that they tilt the playing field so that no one else actually has a chance of winning future elections, right?
Yeah, and
Like
just so
you'll
people
have
know,
you'll
just so
have the
people
guise
know,
of elections. Yeah, go ahead.
what Amanda's talking about is like someone like Orban comes in using a Putin playbook and he
Yep.
takes over the free press. So you're not getting real stories about what's going on. He takes over the judicial branch of the government in Hungary so that everyone is, all the courts go in his favor. Then he takes over the electoral process so that the elections themselves aren't fair. You use the wheels of the government in which to drive the car in the direction that you want to go. That's an authoritarian playbook that was used by Putin in Russia, that was used by Orban, that's used by Erdogan, that's used by a lot of people, and now is being used by Trump over here. And so that's what Amanda's talking about, in case you don't follow that.
Yep, and I did a newsletter. I'm doing a newsletter series called the Entrenchment Agenda. So that's I describe how these authoritarians in the lens of Trump here are digging into office, cementing power, and then using that to crush their competition. Anyone who challenges them, going after the Liz Cheneys of the world, because this would happen inside the party all the time. I mean, we sort of think of them crushing the political opposition. He's been test piloting this case with the Republican Party since 2015, right? Using the structures of the RNC to purge people out of them, target them, get them so that they retire or take themselves off the playing field. I mean, that's been really effective. People just leaving, right? Like, this is too hard. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to retire. Or I don't like these calls that I'm getting from these MAGA Republicans. I'm just going to vote the way that they want me to. So that's been test piloted. He has a playbook to do it. It's happening. But the real threat of the modern day authoritarian is that they get into office and never leave. And I'm really not talking just about Trump running for a third term, his ability to just name a successor. Maybe it's Elon Musk. Maybe it's Don Jr., right? And he's just pulling everything from behind the scenes. That is very possible.
You know it would be Ivanka. You know she would come back in. There's no way he would give it to Don Jr. Come on.
I don't know. I'm not going to waste the brain space to try to analyze the Trump internal family dynamics. I do not have the bandwidth for that one.
No, but what we don't
on a
need
better
is that.
day.
We need to stop it before that happens. I often say that where we are right now is a three-pronged problem, right? The American government by nature, the American politic is sick. We all know that. It's not working the way it should. The republic doesn't work the way it should. We built it on great idealistic ideals that we should retain and hold up, enlightened ideals of, liberty and justice and freedom. But we also built it on the backs of slavery and on women not having a vote. And so there are cracks in the foundation from the very beginning of where we are. And we either shore them up or we let the whole thing fall apart. And I think what we're watching right now is it falling apart. And I think what we need to do is like, okay, so what do we do? How do we fight back? What are the steps that we take? And like we said at the beginning of this conversation, you and I would find ourselves probably on different sides of the political spectrum. When we first met, I was like, Ted Cruz, woof. And you were like, because like, that's where you
You'd be
worked.
surprised. Yeah, I get that a lot.
That's where you worked. And I'm like, oh Lord, here's a video I made making fun of Ted. But this is the thing, like, it is very important that people who still believe in democracy, who still believe in the rules of the republic, who still believe that the law should apply to all of us and that justice matters, have to come together at this moment and fight against what is happening, because it'll be all too easy if we give up, if we step back, if we step away. It'll be people from all sides of the political spectrum, be it the Liz Cheneys or say the Elizabeth Warrens, that come together and say, what are we doing? So what is the next step? Now, I'm watching your party and thinking they are doing nothing, right? They look spineless. They're saying yes and rubber stamping everything. I look at my party and I think, what the hell are these guys doing, right? Like, this is painful. They're not standing up as the opposition the way I would like them to be, as a handful of people who I feel are strong enough to do it. But what do we do outside of that? How do we push our own parties to do the right thing? What do you think about that?
Well, it's largely a question. I mean, I think there was a test case in the last election. I mean, in seeing how if you could build an effective block of Republicans to align with Democrats to defeat Donald Trump,
Right.
that didn't materialize.
Right.
There's been a lot of strategies and effort and time put in trying to persuade a block of quote unquote moderate Republicans to be a block against Donald Trump in the Senate or the House. That has not materialized. So there obviously has to be some kind of different strategy. But in terms of, going back to this framework of protecting electoral competition, if you look at the things you have to do to guarantee that, those are things that you need to be doing now. Protecting the right to organize, right? To assemble, to protest. That allows you to have the building blocks to create a more effective political opposition or Democratic Party. I think those elements were missing in the last election for a lot of reasons that we don't need to get into that weren't necessarily the fault of the candidate that was on the ballot.
Right.
Leave it at that for my assessment.
But it also tells you why we need to be fighting so hard for the student from Colombia that was just rounded up and sent away to a camp. Because if we start taking people out now for their right to protest, it doesn't stop with the one kid who's a green card holder and was against Israel and, this kind of thing. It doesn't stop there. It's just the easiest first target. But if we can just round up people in their homes and send them to different states without, the rule of law, everyone needs to care about this Colombian student, whether they believe in what he was protesting or not. We have to be up in arms about his right to protest.
Yeah. And the thing is, the Trump administration, they're picking these targets deliberately, right? Because they know they're tricky, because they know they divide people. They know that they will make the opposition fight amongst each other, right? That's the biggest thing. Keeping the opposition together. If you look at how political opposition has crumbled in other countries, it's because they fight each other instead of fighting the authoritarian, okay? And so you are right. But it's not just about what's happening in the campus of Columbia. There is an all-out assault on the First Amendment happening right now. If you look at what they're doing there, I mean, using immigration enforcement to filter out speech they don't like. That's bigger than the First Amendment, right? Employing the Federal Communications Commission to do an investigation against CBS over an interview that they didn't like that Kamala Harris did back in October, and having a $20 billion defamation suit against them at the same time, while they're saying, well, that's a nice broadcast license you got there.
Yeah.
I mean, the shakedowns are happening. I mean, it's happening in all elements. And so I think the more that we recognize it for that they're attacking all our rights to speak broadly, these bans that we see about DEI, whatever that is, people don't know what it is. I mean, is it the Enola Gay plane? We don't know. It's gay. Get rid of it.
But I think
this is
we're
censorship
at the stage,
like we've never seen before.
Yeah, no, we're at the stage where we're banning words. I mean, this is what we need to understand. We're at the stage where we're banning words. We're looking at Trump's wish list, but we're also looking at Project 2025's actual plans. And there's a reason that we said Project 2025 was the plan. And the entire time leading up to the election, they were hell-bent on telling us what liars we were. And now they're just going down the checklist. And part of the checklist is getting rid of words. They are banning words from government documents like diversity, like women, like climate change, like gay. And you just made a joke about the fact that they just took all these photos away of a famous World War I bomber called the Enola Gay because it had the word gay in it. And you're like, they are losing their minds. Like, there's no real rhyme or reason to what they're doing except that they are following the checklist written by the Heritage Foundation to make us into a Christian nationalist nation. And if you don't want to be a Christian nationalist authoritarian nation, then this is the time that you have to fight back.
Well, it's about the control. I mean, the big theme here is it's about the control. And this is still a movement that knows it doesn't really have the popular support it projects having. And so they feel an urgency to take control of these institutions and enforce these mandates with a swiftness. And they talk about this openly. We have to move fast now because this is our moment. We may never have it again. And so that is why it is absolutely critical that they are imposed. They know that we have to drive the poll numbers down and give losses early, right? Yeah. Because these things build on each other exponentially, and slowing it down now is absolutely critical. And I think that's why people are so tuned into this funding fight on the Hill. I keep thinking this reminds me so much of what it felt like with much higher and more terrible stakes in the early days of the Tea Party. When I was working on the Capitol Hill for the Republican side, when we saw like these floods of calls coming in to Congress constantly, and people were responsive to them. And now we are seeing that start to work on the Democratic side, not to the degree that it should, but I think one of the things that I am doing is trying to spot, like, where's the talent here? Where are the people in Congress who are actually paying attention to this movement that is materializing and are responding to it? Those are going to be your leaders. And I look at these, I'm just going to vent for a second, these Democratic senators who are choosing now, I'm going to retire now. wave of retirements, the Democratic Senate. Excuse me. If you cannot fight this like authoritarian mad king economy that hurts national security, all the cultural issues you care about, and have all the real world impacts that we've been talking about would come that are happening right now, and you decide, "Ugh, I don't want to run again, it's too hard," get out, leave now, and get somebody who will actually do something with this just tsunami of material that is coming at you that can be channeled in a more positive direction. So that's my note on that.
I could
Get
not
out.
agree with you more. Hit the road. Yeah. I see Kitty is back with us. So I'm sure we have some
Yes.
questions from the audience.
We do. We have a lot of questions. Amanda, I think it's really important for us to dive into a couple of really important things that Protect Democracy does. One of the reasons that we partner with Protect Democracy and respect the work so much. And you brought this up, but I think a lot of people in our chat and who joined us tonight really want to understand the difference between what we pay attention to and what we just say, actually, Trump has the executive authority to do that. And you've done a really good job of sort of breaking that down for us so that we can kind of understand what rabbit hole we go down and what we're just like, we can't do that right now because he does have executive power. So can you just sort of give us a good example of that? And you gave a lot in your newsletter, but you tell us what might be helpful.
Sure. I mean, it is a hard question because there are so many important things that he's doing that are terrible. He has a lot of leeway with the executive power that he is absolutely intent of using in a maximalist way in seeking help from the Supreme Court to help him do it. So what are we focused on? We know how he's done the pardon abuse. So I have this bucket we call regulatory retaliation. Essentially, authoritarians that come into power, they use every kind of government resource that they can as a kind of carrot or stick, a reward for your allies, the people who are on his good side, punishment for the bad guys. There's that old saying, for my friends, enemy, everything, for my enemies, the law. That's sort of what we're seeing now, right? People who commit acts of political violence, January 6 rioters, domestic violence, Mel Gibson, you get all kinds of goodies, pardons, you get your gun rights back, no problem. Everyone else, we're going to prosecute you. But that said,
yeah, if you don't buy a Tesla, you're a domestic terrorist.
There
if you
you go.
scratch a Tesla, but you can be out of jail if you're a 1-6er. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but in this bucket of regulatory retaliation, which I also put a lot of the purges and the firings, I think there's the most capacity to fight back right now. You mentioned the firings that were happening and how the courts are having to turn those back. There's a lot of things that they're doing that they're not going to get away with, but it is absolutely essential that we have a rush of litigation to try to stop it. We're involved in some of that. Elon Musk, what I think that really is not only a good fight to have in the courts, but is easily understood by the public. Yes, Elon Musk is a billionaire. Policy-wise, I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is him getting unvetted, unfettered access to personal data without any kind of security clearances, any kind of vetting, any kind of government position. I think the courts should be fairly strong on that. And so that's going to be something to be really keyed in on, and stopping the Elon Musk takeover of our personal data. I think is absolutely essential to be activated on. And I think that's something the public understands. But more long-term, I mean, again, it all gets back to the idea of we absolutely have to be laser focused on preserving electoral competition 26 and 28. Yes, to the things that I mentioned earlier about protecting the right to organize, assemble, and speak. And by the way, the best way for every American to do that is to actually exercise those rights now, vigorously, loudly, often, in whatever way that you can. I mean, if you want to call your congressman 5 times a day, that's great. If you want to hold a sign on the street, that's great too. If you want to become a disinformation expert and be like an online meme warrior, that's awesome too. I don't discount any of that because it actually is important. I think Donald Trump showed that with the rise of his social media activists, and we're starting to see some of that happen because that's where it's all happening. But the big thing to make those competitive elections matter is to actually have competitive candidates, right? So that is hard. And so I hear a lot of people, they kind of say like, okay, well, what do we do for the future election? That organizing is happening right now. I think it is absolutely essential to get people organized and focused on these short-term battles, whether it's a CR, whether it's Elon Musk getting access to federal data. I don't, I'm not totally conversant in the left-wing liberal atmosphere, so I can't forecast exactly what those battles will be, but there absolutely have to be some. And you will hear people that we can only fight things that we can win on. I disagree with that. Every fight is an organizing opportunity, and these are building blocks that build you up towards winning midterms. And through that process of having these fights and organizing and calling members of Congress, you will foster and cultivate political talent, right? Like, this is the testing ground now. So do not wait. I hear a lot of things, people will say, well, who's organizing? Who's coordinating the messaging? I really hate to break it to you. No one. There is no messaging talking point document that is going to be handed down from some strategist in the sky. It is not, and if they did, it would suck. So that's hard to hear. I know people don't want to hear it, but that is absolutely the reality of it. And if you keep going to these things, you're going to notice who's popping. You will see who the leaders are, but that is what's going to be required in 26 and 28 have already started.
And fortunately, we have someone who has built a very robust and very popular brand addressing just these issues of like getting the word out and messaging, and Leigh. So Leigh, we could do a whole call on you and how you built it, but where you are right now, what do you see as sort of the most important thing for you and people who want to become more potent messengers in this fight, or even get their kids to become more potent messengers? Sort of tell us what you're thinking about.
This is all essential. And I will tell you about this. And I do think it is very important that everyone take personal responsibility, whether it's for their family members, for their small groups. The way I was talking earlier, we are responsible for our people. It is essential we talk about these things, that we stop doing this. I don't talk about politics thing. Let's just not discuss it. We have to discuss it, constantly discuss it. But I will say, I'm looking at your chat. And so many people are so upset right now with Democratic leadership, right? Because it appears that Schumer is deciding to vote for the continued resolution. And people say, well, I don't understand. Like, why is he doing that? What's going on? And here's the thing. I don't understand either. And I'll tell you that straight up, because I think the thing is that Democrats, I keep waiting for them to find their fight. And when I say Democrats, I mean Democratic leadership. I mean Chuck Schumer. I mean Hakeem Jeffries. I mean the people that you know as the leaders. I keep waiting for them to collectively band together and fight back, to acknowledge it's not the 1990s or the early 2000s anymore. The game has fundamentally changed and it is not going back. And it seems to me that they're not getting it. And maybe that's the collective age. Maybe it's because it has worked for them for so long. Maybe because they're running the same playbook that worked before. But ultimately, I think what they have to understand, and they have to understand faster than they are doing it, is that this is not working. This we have to fund the government because, otherwise people won't get their checks. Well, people are already not getting their checks. We're already shutting down half of the Department of Education, all of our national parks, all of our, I remember one of the shutdowns before. My son was in San Francisco to see Alcatraz, and he couldn't go because Alcatraz was shut because the government was shut down. We're already doing that with just the Republicans' actions using Doge. So as far as I'm concerned, the Democratic part of the government, though they are the minority, needs to play fire with fire. The Republicans don't have enough votes on their own. The Democrats need the Democrats to vote with them. And this should be the time where they don't give them what they want, where they act as an obstruction to this terrible, terrible bill that they have that will only hurt people and fire more people. Because I think ultimately it is heartbreaking for people who believe in the policies the Democrats stand for, who believe in the rights of working people and the rights of women and the rights of the LGBTQ community, to watch us have better plans, better candidates, better ideas, and the majority sentiment in the nation, and continue to lose. It is hard to watch. And so I think that there's a sense, not only in your chat, but in the country, that you're like, what are they doing? Like, why is this happening? And I think the thing is that we have to I think we're going to have to fight our own party, sadly. And I don't think any of us wanted to. I think we're going to have to start pushing them from the outside, where they are already irritated that groups like Indivisible and Move On are calling them all the time, right? They're like, what do you want us to do? We're out of power. And we're like, we want you to act like the Republicans would act. We want you to act like Mitch McConnell would act. We want you to act the way the Republicans do when you guys have power. Get in the way, get in front of cameras, talk to us about how terrible these decisions are and how many people they're hurting. And they're going to take your Social Security, they're going to take your Medicare, and they're going to take, your SNAP benefits. Tell us every single day. And I'm watching people go like, a government shutdown would be worth it in this moment, to say the people in charge of the government right now are Republicans straight across the board. So really, they're going to blame the Democrats anyway. Allow the Republicans to take this hit, allow them to shut the government down, and allow them to take the pain. But the Democrats often do the right thing. And in this case, I think this is the wrong thing. And so I see what people are doing. When it comes back to how do we get our people, yes, I think the calls that you talked at the beginning of the episode, the 5 calls, this actually works. It drives them crazy, which I think is marvelous. But to tell them that we are paying attention, that we are listening. For so long, the American citizens were just so happy living in a democracy that we didn't really think that much about our democracy. I often compare American democracy to a couple in a long-term marriage. You're like, Brian will always be there, right? Like, I don't need to think that much about him. Like, and that's how America treated democracy. And for a long time, we didn't put any work into the relationship. And now America has a wandering eye for autocracy, and we really need to pull it back. We really need to put in the effort. And that is calling our representatives, paying attention to these bills, sending money to the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. These are things that we can actually do, active items, but also primering Democratic representatives that are not doing their job, calling our House leader and our Senate leader and saying, we are so disappointed, so disgusted with this. This is not what we want, because what we want are fighters. And if you're not up to the job, lead, follower, get out of the way. And at this point, I think a lot of them need to get out of the way. That's my rant.
So I would love to hear you guys. There's a lot of conversation, obviously, about the fact that Chuck Schumer is going to vote for the continuing resolution. So Amanda, what would you tell people? I mean, what would the Tea Party do? Put yourself back there. Take us back to 2010. What would the Tea Party do?
I mean, the Tea Party absolutely would not lend any votes to the Democrats to advance their agenda. It would be a flat no. I would be, we wouldn't even show up to work, probably. Like this, you're running the government, you do it. And if you need help, you can come beg us for it and there will be a price. I mean, that's the kind of thing I don't think they should help. Number one, if they need the help, you should make the Republicans and Donald Trump beg for it. And you should have a very high price, very high, right? Like at a minimum. So that's what I would advise. As a second step, and I'm not even sure I really like this, but like you could sort of see like a short-term clean CR, but like doing anything that actually enables Elon Trump, oh my God, illegal acts, I think is a huge problem, because you become a participant in that kind of behavior. So I sort of a baseline have a problem around that. But, in terms of what the Tea Party would do, we would have been organizing for this all in the week up to it, pounding the Hill with calls to Congress. We kind of had the saying, if they won't see the light, make them feel the heat. Make them hear from you. You cannot wait until the day the bill is called to start organizing around it. You have to have a whole lead up to it so that everyone is on notice, that your eyes will be on you. We are all watching this. And if you vote a certain way, you will have a primary opponent. One of the big lessons from the Tea Party was that no, you do not wait till leadership. I'll tell you, you're going to hear the same thing. Leadership will always say, we're going to fight on this later, closer to the election. They will always find a way to fight another day, to keep going with the status quo behavior and tell you, we will fight later. That day never comes. You will have your biggest impact when there is a primary attached to it, right? Like if you were trying to change the direction of the party, that is where you have the most impact. So you got to have litmus tests, essentially, so to speak, and that, is very easily organized around votes that you can rally the public behind to try to get them to do the right thing. So that's kind of where I'd go with that. And it's more important for just like the movement, right? Because if you have all this energy, there is this energy out there. There's energy on this call. People are wanting to watch this. If that is not channeled into a positive direction, it becomes despair. Like it goes away. It kind of comes this loathing where people sit out elections. They say everybody's the same. What are we going to do? Blah, blah, blah. So got to get people activated around fights. And you know what? You may not win them all, but losing those fights along the way helps you find your fighters. It builds a bigger sense of community. You get bound together in this fight. And so those are the things I'm looking to see happen, and where we can play a role when it comes down to the issues that we care about. And I think all the elements are there, right? But it's tough because the stakes are higher than they have been in previous elections. Threats to personal safety, like, it's a thing. Like, but as a part of this, things that you should do, you have to lock up your personal data. Protect yourself so that you can actually be a participant in this fight, right? Like, do whatever you have to do to keep yourself secure, mentally, physically, whatever, so that you can stay on this playing field over the long term.
Good advice. Really good advice.
Really
All right,
good
Leigh,
advice.
what,
And
what would
look where
you
we're
tell
at.
everyone? Yeah, I mean,
I
on
mean,
the
look where
call.
we're at. Like, I couldn't agree with Amanda more. Like, here's the thing. I would like to create a movement that was modeled after the Tea Party, because they knew how to fight. They pushed their own party from the outside to be the way that they wanted it to be. Now, I don't agree with what the Tea Party wanted, but I think that's what we need to do on the Democratic side, because clearly, as Amanda's saying, our leadership is not going to do it. They're talking about waiting for the right pitch, right? Like, waiting for the perfect ball. You're like, just shut it. Like,
guarantee me a win and I'll
just
play.
hold
Okay.
on. Like, no, so we're not going to do that. And if it has to happen from the outside, it has to happen from the outside. And it's probably not a surprise that, it's a mouthy woman talking about this. But I really think that this is what has to happen. I think we need to be primarying our own people. I think we need to be telling them that we're not happy with what they're doing. I don't think you get guaranteed leadership. I think you don't get guaranteed reelection. I think that we need to be pushing them from the outside. The Tea Party was very effective. They were very effective at pushing their own party. And for a long time, people weren't even sure if they were Republicans or if they were on their side or not on their side. And then they got into more power, and they were able to push from inside the Congress themselves and create a Tea Party caucus. And they were so effective that John Boehner quit. He was like, I can't, right? He left. You got Paul Ryan in there, and then MAGA was so effective they made Paul Ryan leave, right? So these outside groups can happen, and I think that this playing by the rules thing is not really working for us. We can see it's not working for us. It's certainly not working for the American people. So it must be pushed. We must push our own team. And I often think of, I've been thinking lately a lot about Back to the Future, the movie Back to the Future, and I think, like, that's kind of what we need. Like, if the Democratic Party is like anybody, to me, it's like George McFly back in town. Like he can't quite get it together. He's kind of nerdy. You want him to win. He has to end up with the girl, right? But you need a younger, fresher, newer person to show up and push him to be the best version of himself so he can win. We're on the same team. We're in the same family, right? But that guy's never going to have the courage on his own. He is never going to have the chutzpah on his own. He is never going to get the girl. He's never going to win without the Marty character. And I think that's what the Democrats need now. They need a young outside push to make them into the best version of themselves, because they clearly cannot do it on their own. And we cannot sit around watching our country devolve into some terrible authoritarian nightmare under the stupidest, most greedy people in the world, because we just couldn't get it together in this moment. I was saying earlier that there are three aspects that we're dealing with right now. One is the sickness of the body politic, which we will deal with if we get to the next election. Then what's happening right now, though, is the body is bleeding out. We are bleeding out. Like, democracy itself is dying right in front of our eyes. And we must staunch the bleeding. That's the first thing we have to do. And part of that is acting as an opposition party to stop what's happening, for calling to make people upset, to tank Trump's approval ratings, to tank Musk's approval ratings, to make it so miserable that maybe some of the Republicans even have cover to stand up against him, to do the right thing, because the approval ratings keep tanking. That's something we can do short term. Midterm, we have to sew up the wound, which is we must shore up our elections, do the things that Amanda was talking about to make sure that if we get to 26, if we get to 28, the elections are free and fair and safe, that we know our votes will be counted, that we're not questioning if the election was even real or not. And then we get to the election and we start curing the body. We start dealing with the cancer. We start cutting out problems that are there. We start giving it actual treatment. But we won't even get to that point if we don't stop the bleeding now, which is, I think, why we need to fight so hard in this moment.
Yeah.
Here,
And
here.
it's one
Let's
of the
start the Marty party.
reasons.
right?
Yeah. It's one of the reasons that we at Big Tent, we really believe so strongly in Amanda's organization, Protect Democracy, because they have
Mhm.
been so clear-eyed, the whole time, and are always willing to sort of fight hard, do the thing, pivot when they need to, learn their lessons. And so I can't recommend to everybody, if you want to do something, support Protect Democracy for sure, and follow Leigh on PoliticsGirl. Okay, well, let's just end with a couple of like more sort of not light, but tell me, I would love to hear both of you guys, because you did bring it up, like the anticipatory obedience happened much quicker than you thought. So who's the worst? Like, you each get to pick one of these tech bro millionaire business people who like caved so fast. Like, who do you think is the worst? Like, top worst
Zuckerberg.
person?
Zuckerberg. I've
Okay.
I mean, that guy rolled over in a hot second. He's the second richest man in the world. Like, there was no need for him to roll over that fast. He owns 51% of Facebook. Like, he and Meta. He is the sole proprietor of all of that. He did not need to roll over. He does not have a rocket company that's waiting for approval from the government. And he just, I mean, a lot of these people, I think billionaires by general nature, I am not a pro-billionaire person. I think they're a policy problem. But in general, I think once you get to a certain level of wealth, I think you lose perspective on humanity. And I just think you don't live in the same world as the rest of us. It's not just about like, you don't have to worry about healthcare costs and you don't have to worry about where your next meal's coming from, but like, you just don't function in the regular human sphere with the rest of us. And you start making decisions that really make no sense. And I do think a lot of them are doing that. So for me, immediate sellout was Zuckerberg.
All right,
Amanda?
Amanda, you get one.
Yeah, I mean, trying to find who. So I'll start this. So start the conversation saying it's hard to quantify how bad things are because it can always get worse and worse. And as watching the Republican Party get co-opted and hijacked by Trump, it always finds a way to get worse and worse. And the thing that I continually struggle to deal with are the Republicans who came to Trump's side after January 6th, who actually had like some kind of opposition to him. Like, number one as a baseline, like that still baffles me. The people who he continued to attract, who actually were maybe sort of never Trumpy in the first Trump administration, but are all in the second time around. And, there are Republicans who voted for impeachment, but then voted to confirm Kash Patel to FBI director. Like that's a real sticking point for me. RFK, I'm not even, that's a problem, but Kash Patel, if there was anything that you were going to fight on, and I actually put this to the Democrats too, if there was anything that you were going to fight on in the early days to draw a line, it should have been that goddamn nomination, right? Like, no, we will not have a vote on this. Yes, we will throw down every legislative and parliamentary tool possible to block or delay this vote. That should have been fight right there, because the whole remaking of the government, a lot of it depends on their whitewashing and revisionist history of January 6th. And that's not just about that day. I mean, it is remaking the government, transforming in a way that is fundamentally more dangerous on a level, at a personal security level, for people who want to challenge this administration. And so the people that found a way to come around on that, that's the one that hurts. That's the one that I spend too much time thinking about today.
Well, that's what Steve Bannon's talking about when he says history is written by the winners, right? Like, they're trying to change the history of January 6th. They really are trying to make it a day of love that you can support and get behind, and try and, rewire our brains to what happened. And we have to make sure that we don't allow those
in a
things
way
to
that
happen.
makes our politics more dangerous, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is all about making political violence that benefits Donald Trump okay, a viable tool. And so that's why it's just, it's absolutely essential. I mean, it can happen again. It can happen again if he loses the next election. So it's absolutely important to impose significant losses, not on Donald Trump, the authoritarian movement, in the midterms, and every opportunity along the way.
Yes. And listen, ladies, I could hang out with you for, the next 4 years. And I would love to. We will.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
Sure.
let's do it. What
Bring
you guys
it.
doing? This is what we're doing. We so appreciate your time, your energy, your dedication to our country, and everything you're doing. Neither one of you have shied away from this fight. Like right after the election, you were both in it to win it, and we're really, really grateful for that. And we hope you'll come back to Big Tent. And we want to thank everyone who came. And yeah, we're not going anywhere. So we're in this together, and we are the heroes we need. So everyone have a great night. And again, Amanda and Leigh, thank you so much.
Bye.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
See ya.